Much grace, mercy, and peace be to you from God our Father, and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the Beloved One. Amen. I don't think I'll ever forget the look on Miriam's face as she came around the back of the organ and the Chapel of the Holy Trinity on the campus of Concordia University, Ann Arbor. She was holding her dad's arm. Jim had, for 20 or 30 seconds before the picture was taken, and for a solid minute afterwards, been a total mess. But he sucked it up and got it together, so he looks pretty composed for the picture. But Miriam, in that wedding dress, with her hair done up all tall in a veil, she looked like a kid in a candy shop. She had big, wide eyes as she scanned the crowd and saw family and friends holding her calla lily bouquet. As she walked with her dad and turned that corner, she saw our friends and family up there standing in attendance on us. And she saw her groom looking up the aisle, looking at her, waiting for her to walk down. And her face was just a reflection of joy, just absolute delight. I don't know what my face looked like at the time. The cameraman was kind of busy. But I do have a picture on my mantle of later in the service with my dad standing in the background. He was the officiating pastor. And Miriam and I are facing each other, and we're holding hands. And I was just speaking tender words of promise to her as her groom, and she was just speaking tender words of promise to me as my bride. And I look, well, skinny, first of all, awfully young. I was teaching at a Lutheran high school, so I had to shave my beard. I only had a mustache and kind of floppy, curly hair. But besides all that, I looked absolutely in love, just head over heels, just a little puppy dog. And I can't tell you that every moment since has been just like that. And you and I both know that because we're in a fallen, sinful world, all of our relationships, our marriages included, all of them are dysfunctional to one extent or another, sometimes more, sometimes less. And whether you've ever been married or never been married, or your marriage was a roller coaster or just terrible, or whether your marriage has been a delight to you, for what the Bible says today, you don't have to own your baggage today, and I don't have to own mine. I know it's hard because we're broken and fallen people, and we tend to hurt the ones we love the most, and they hurt us too. So you have permission not to have to think about your marriage, but this image still has something to say for us, and it's an image that's wrapped up in that moment that seemed almost perfect, and yet has been lived out in various ways throughout my married relationship with my wife. And there have been times where that hasn't felt like it was still the case, and yet that moment is a precious moment of delight that informs how God looks at us today. And regardless of our baggage, it's still something that I think He wants us to hold on to. As we read the book, the Old Testament book of the Song of Solomon, we've got good excuses to read it as if it were talking about Jesus and His bride, the church, as if it were talking about Christ and His relationship with you. The whole Old Testament uses that image, and it points us to this reading. I mean, the Song of Solomon is in our scriptures, and because it's in the Bible, we read it differently. We don't want to try to make every detail line up exactly, but there's something at the heart of that moment, that delight that a groom has in his bride, the delight that bride has in her groom. If you can hold on to that moment for just a moment, it's going to help us understand our relationship with God in Jesus Christ. So in the sermon notes, you see Song of Solomon chapter 6, verse 3 is what the bride says to the bridegroom. This is what the bride says to the bridegroom in Song of Solomon. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. Now that's a word of confidence. That's a word of surety. That's a word of joy and delight. That's a word that happens at the altar. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. I know it to be true. I trust it to be true. I've seen it to be true. We belong to each other. I belong to him, and he belongs to me. Later in Song of Solomon chapter 7, she says it even more strongly. She says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. Hubba, hubba. Yeah, okay. You responded about as well as the first service. I don't do a very good hubba hubba bride, and that's okay. The point is, she knows and is so confident that his love for her is strong that she can even boast and brag about how much she desires him. And that makes her desire him right back. That moment of delight where husband and wife, bride and groom belong to each other. And that's the kind of confidence that I'd like to invite you into today. I think that's part of the promise. That's part of what Jesus has for you today. And as you take this into your week, that confidence that can say, no matter what else is going on in your life, here's something you know for sure. You are your beloved's, and your beloved is yours. You belong to Jesus, and you can have confidence in that. And you can also have confidence in this. Your Jesus belongs to you. The two of you belong together. It's not always easy to have confidence in that promise. There's a little bit later in Song of Solomon chapter 4, it starts out with the bridegroom saying to the bride, "How beautiful you are, my darling, how beautiful." And when I imagine Jesus saying something like that to me, at least part of my response is, yeah, right. I mean, come on, Jesus. I know what I'm like. I know what my week has been like. I know the sin that still clings to me. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've talked about, remember, even our righteous acts are like filthy rags. Jesus says he delights in me, but I know better, right? He says I'm beautiful, but I know parts of my life that are far from it. I know my own failures. I know I'm a stinking sinner. And so when he says, "You are altogether beautiful, my darling, there's no flaw in you," I kind of go, yeah, right, that can't be the case. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I think it might kind of be like when my wife kind of gets all gussied up and gets her makeup just right, and she's done her hair, and she's wearing that new outfit because we're going to go out, and I say to her, "Man, you look good." And she says, "Yeah, I know." When I tell her, "Oh, you look beautiful, my darling. You are altogether beautiful," and she feels beautiful, she can receive that compliment from me and sometimes even return it. And then there's the days when it's been a long weekend and she hasn't had a shower in a couple of days and she's dressed up in sweatshirt and sweatpants and her hair's been pulled back and she's wearing no makeup at all. I say, "Honey, you are hot." And she rolls her eyes at me. And I think sometimes she thinks I'm just being a boy and boys will say anything. And, sometimes she's right. But I also think that she doesn't quite understand how she can be drop-dead gorgeous even when she's wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt and hasn't washed her hair in 3 days and isn't wearing any makeup. And I can find her absolutely lovely. Sometimes she just doesn't get how beautiful she is. And how beautiful she is to me. So the two go together. When she feels beautiful, when she thinks anybody in this room would say she's beautiful, then she can receive it from me. But when she feels like anybody but me in this room would say, "Ooh, what happened? That's kind of a train wreck," she doesn't receive it from me well either. And I think that's kind of what happens with us and Jesus. Jesus says, and you can see what the bridegroom says to the bride in Song of Solomon chapter 4, verse 7. It starts in 4, verse 1, "How beautiful you are, my darling, how beautiful." And then the groom goes on to talk about her eyes in detail, and her hair in detail, and her teeth, and her lips, and her temple, and her neck. And he keeps going, but I'm going to stop because it's PG-13 sermon. And parts of Song of Solomon, I think, might be NC-17. But he keeps describing her until he gets all the way down to verse 7 where he says, "You are altogether beautiful, all of you, all of your parts separately and together, hubba hubba. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you." And when Jesus says that about me, it's natural for me to go, "Well, yeah, but I haven't washed my hair in 3 days, and I'm wearing a pair of sweatpants. I don't have any makeup." I know the reality. I know my sin. The psalmist says, "I know my sin, it's always before me." You know your week. I know mine. I could give you a list. I won't, but I've got one small example. This last week I was talking to a friend, and it was kind of an important topic and kind of a frustrating topic. And I had told myself I wasn't going to respond in anger or frustration. I was going to let some of that leak because I knew it wasn't his fault. And as we got into the middle of it, I still did. I told myself I wasn't going to. And I really responded in a way that that stepped on his toes, that kind of blew him out of the water, that hurt his feelings. We always hurt the ones we love. And I knew it. I told myself I wasn't going to do it before I did it, and I knew it while I was doing it. And afterwards, I thought, yeah, that wasn't. Maybe I should apologize to him. And then I thought, well, next time I see him, I'm sure it wasn't that big of a deal. We'll just let it blow over. And I see that brokenness in me. That's just a small example. I see that brokenness in me, and I hear Jesus say, "You're altogether beautiful. There's no flaw in you." And I want to say, what are you on, Jesus? What are you looking at? Because I know it's not me. And there's a sense in which I'm right. There's a sense in which I know and you know that because even though we're redeemed, even though we're baptized, even though we're a part of God's family, even though we're forgiven and covered, even though that's true of us, that as long as we still live in this broken and sinful world, we bring our brokenness and our sinfulness to this world too. So I know that I still have sin in me. It still clings to me, even though I've been forgiven. I know I wrestle with that. I know you do too. I've seen your weeks. They look like mine sometimes. And yet the image that we have today from Jesus is not a, "You're so bad and I need you to clean your act up." It's not, "You're so sinful." This is not a, "Your righteous acts are like filthy rags" verses, although that also is Isaiah. This is a, "You will be called, my delight is in her, because I will delight in you and I will marry you again, my people that I love." This is a, "She is altogether beautiful, completely flawless in my sight" kind of morning. So while it's true that for the now time, even though already I've been forgiven, it's not yet perfect the way it's going to be when the marriage feast of the Lamb begins in earnest, although it's not going to be the same thing as when the new Jerusalem comes down out of heaven from God and the marriage party begins in earnest. Although until the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come, I will still struggle with sin and my own sinfulness and your sinfulness too. Yet for today what you need to hear is Jesus saying to you, "You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you." And he intends you to believe that. He says it to you that you might trust it. He expresses his love to you that way that you might receive his delight and return his delight. Of course he knows you're sinful. That's not what he's talking about right now. He wants you to know how much he loves you, how much he delights in you, so that he can call you altogether beautiful. You see, the bride can't say, "I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine," unless she trusts that promise, unless she knows the heart of her groom, unless she trusts when he says, "You are altogether beautiful," and she can say, "I am my beloved's and his desire is for me." She's not boasting of her beauty at that point. She's reveling in his view of her. And once I know that even though I'm sinful, yet Jesus says this word of promise and delight over me, that changes how I act and how I live. When I got an email from my friend this week that said, "You know that conversation we had? We need to talk about it a little bit because that was kind of offensive. That kind of hurt. I can't let that go. We actually need to talk about this." Because I know Jesus delights in me, even though I know I'm a sinner, I don't have to justify myself. You see, I don't have to make myself look out to be something better than I am. I don't have to make sure Jesus only sees me when I've washed my hair and I have my makeup on. I don't have to be wearing my Sunday best every time Jesus wants to show up in my house. Jesus can come over anytime and find me wearing my sweatpants, having not showered in 3 days, because I know and I trust that he's beautiful. So I don't have to hide it. I don't have to pretend it didn't happen. I don't have to justify myself or tell him why it was his fault I yelled at him. I could simply respond, "You're right. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I love you. I was wrong. I'm sorry, and I love you." Because I don't have to hold on to that image of me being perfect so I can be loved. I know I'm not perfect, but I know even more that I am loved. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you. And I know part of wants you to say, no, Jesus, that's not true of me, but I want you to tell that little part of you to shut up and go away for a little while so you can receive this delight. Jesus thinks you're beautiful. Oh, he is madly head over heels in love with you. And he delights in you. Even when you're not at your Sunday best. The confidence of the bride when she says, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine, the confidence of the bride flows from the promise of the bridegroom, from what the bridegroom says about her. And she also gets a little help from her friends. I mean, this was something I'd kind of forgotten about in the Song of Solomon. There's these other characters. There's the bride and the groom, but there's also the friends. They're kind of the wedding party, the attendants, the best man and the maid of honor, and everybody that's there to help celebrate. You see that on the bottom of your sheet. There's what the bride says to the bridegroom. There's what the bridegroom says to the bride. But in the Song of Solomon, there's also what the friends say to the bride. They say to her, where is your beloved turned that we may seek him with you? I mean, this is kind of like at the reception. The groom has stepped outside and the bride's like, where'd he go? They're clinking the glasses. I need to, and the maid of honor says, oh, I know where he is. Come on, I'll take you to him. Now, it's not exactly like that. This is a Middle Eastern wedding from several thousand years ago, but they've got different customs. There seems to have also been this almost hide and seek over the course of maybe even a couple of days. I mean, this is like a week-long party here we're talking about. And it involves going to people's houses and taking other people to your house. I mean, it's a fairly complicated thing. But the friends are there to say to the bride, where'd he go? Are you looking for him? We want to help you look for him too. We want to seek him with you. We want to help you find the one who delights in being found by you. You see, the groom isn't hiding because he doesn't want her to find him. The groom is hiding because he does. Oh, he does. He can't wait to be found by her. And the friends are there to say, hey, can we help you out? Where'd he go? We want to help you find him too. So this is an image of Christ and his love for the church. It's also an image of Jesus and his love for you. And it gives us a hint, an image for what it means to be church to each other. I've got my relationship with Jesus, but I've also got a relationship with you. I get to be your friend. I get to have the joy of John the Baptist, the one that says, I know that the bridegroom belongs to the bride. The bride doesn't belong to the best man, but I get to be your best man. You get to be the maid of honor for other people. You get to be attendants in the wedding, the friends that say, where has your beloved gone? We will help you look for him. We'll keep searching till we find him. I think I heard him over there. Let's go see. And because I know that the church, the bride of Christ, is not yet perfect the way she's going to be, and yet I still know that the bride of Christ, the church, is his beloved, treasured possession, that he delights in her and considers her altogether beautiful, because I know both of those things at the same time. I don't have to expect from you, and you don't have to expect from me that we're going to do this perfectly. I can try to help you find the Jesus who would delight in being found by you. And I don't have to get hung up on being perfect as I do it. I know I'm a stinking sinner. We're just not talking about that right now. My friend, the one who emailed me, didn't have to make sure he did the email exactly right. In fact, he kind of didn't, but that's okay. He didn't have to get the relationship. He didn't have to say, well, I can't point out sin in Roscoe's life because I know I'm a sinner too. And he is a sinner. He stepped on my toes before. But that's not the point. The point isn't how sinful you are. The point is you're altogether beautiful. You get to be the church to each other. He pointed me back to Jesus. He called out my sin because it was getting in the way of our relationship, and he wanted to deal with it. And when I said, I was wrong, I'm sorry, and I love you, he immediately wrote back, you're completely forgiven, and there's no baggage between us. He pointed me back to Jesus, the Jesus who loves and delights to be found by me. That's your role as church. That's your role as the friends of the bride. You get to say to people in your life, in your family, in your workplaces, did I hear his voice? Was that his footstep? I know you're looking for him. I know it's hard to see him sometimes, and I'm here to help you. I'm sold out committed. I want to celebrate your relationship with your beloved, and I want to strengthen that relationship in any way possible. Our friends stood up next to us. Our friends and our families were right there when we got married. Why? Why do we do that? Because they belong to our relationship too. The people that stood up and made toasts at our wedding, they were people that we could say our relationship would not be the same except for them. You get to play that role too. You get the joy of John the Baptist, the joy of being the best man, the maid of honor. You get to point people back to Jesus without expecting perfection from them or from you. You're not going to get this church thing right, but we are going to keep doing it together. You're going to step on each other's toes. I know one guy who got his toes stepped on by his pastor this last week. It's going to happen. We're not going to get it right, but it is our delight to keep encouraging each other in that relationship of delight with Jesus. Where has your beloved turned that we may seek him with you? That's one thing we can say to each other that helps, but it points us back to the Jesus that says to you, you are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you. And having your friends by your side and the promise of your bridegroom ringing in your ears, you get to stand up this week and say, not just in worship, but as you live out the rest of your life, not in fear of your imperfection, but rejoicing in his delight in you, you get to say with confidence, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. I belong to my Jesus, and my Jesus belongs to me. What a delight. Amen.